Sorry, everyone. Welcome back to Gaelic Games Fan TV. How are we all getting on? How is the form? I hope we are all keeping well. So the All-Ireland Hurling Championship season is done. The football season is done. And with that, in this video, we are going to be grading every county in the hurling season based off of how they done in the league and how they done in the championship. Now, obviously, these grades are based on my opinion, essentially. So, that's obviously worth bearing in mind. And then second of all, it is going to be based off like what we would have expected from them at the start of the year. I tend to do a video like this every year, both on hurling and football, when the championship is concluded, sort of reviewing every county and grading them based off of what we expected them to maybe do at the start of the year and the season they had. So yeah, like if certain counties get a higher grade than others, it doesn't necessarily mean that county is better than the other one. It just means that they had a better season in context of what we would have expected. So if anyone's new to the channel, if you could hit the like button and subscribe, that would be very much appreciated. We're going to be going in alphabetical order as well. And a bit of a disclaimer, we won't be discussing any of the counties from the Christy Ring Cup and lower. And the main reason being is I haven't seen enough of them, to be honest with you. I haven't watched enough Christy Ring, Laurie Marr. And so I don't really want... I mean, some say I'm bluffing a lot of the time anyway on this channel. I do put a bit of work into it, to be fair. And I do my research despite what people actually think. But in saying that, it would be bluffing, absolutely going down the realms there. And look, anyone who won the Christy Ring, the Laurie Marr, it's obviously an A. Do you know that way? And look, we'll be curious to see, like, obviously, likes of London in the Joe McDonagh next year. Very curious to see how they get on. But, we're going to be looking at the Joe McDonagh Cup teams and obviously the Liam McCarthy teams as well. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with Antrim, and I've given them a D. Look, I mean, looking through their season, they finished 5th in Division 1B. Their only wins came against Laois and Westmeath. They were relegated from Leinster, losing every game. Like a difficult one for Antrim. Obviously, Davy Fitz, first season as Antrim manager, looking like he's still going to be there next year as well, and into the Joe McDonagh next year, which they'll be certainly one of the contenders, although you do have Carlow in there who are very strong. You'll have Laois still going to be in there, Westmeath as well, so it's going to be a very competitive Joe McDonagh Cup next season. Look, looking at the Leinster Championship and the teams that were in there, it was always going to be very tough for them, especially with Offaly coming up. A great buzz around Offaly, young players coming through. Antrim have had retirements and players leave the panel over the last couple of seasons, so it's probably not a big surprise to kind of see this happen. James Naughton was one of their best players this year. He scored 358 in the league and 235 in Leinster. Look, you could say maybe that you would go with an F, given the they were relegated from Leinster, losing every game, and then they finished 5th in Division 1B. But like, some of those performances in Leinster actually weren't terrible. I thought they played well against Wexford. They were a little bit unlucky against Offaly in different parts as well. And I think when you're looking at it, like if Antrim had stayed in Leinster, you probably would have gone with a C or a B. So I think to say them getting relegated gives them an F, I think is a little bit harsh. And I think looking at some of their performances, it hasn't been great from Antrim, but I don't think it was a complete failure of a season, in my opinion. So we'll go with a D. Looking at Carlow, we've gone with a C here. This is a difficult one, to be honest with you, because Carlow did well in Division 1B. They finished 4th and even had a famous win versus Waterford. And Carlow, as a whole, over the last couple of years, has made some great progress in hurling. You think of that draw with Kilkenny in the Leinster Championship last year. They've had some brilliant performances and results. The Joe McDonagh is it's unfortunately where it went wrong a little bit. Look, they finished 3rd in the Joe McDonagh and they only lost one game, and that was versus the eventual champions Kildare. They were just a little bit unlucky with score difference and everything else, the way things kind of worked out with the draw with Laois, that they missed out on getting to a final. Had they have gotten to a final in Croke Park, I do think they would have beaten Kildare, in all honesty. I think they would have won that game, but look, they didn't get there. Like, that is where it started. Kavanagh scored 443 in the Joe McDonagh, while Chris Nolan was there with 712. And Carlow as well were actually the top scorers in the Joe McDonagh. So very, very unlucky, to be honest with you, for not getting out of there. And maybe a C is a little bit harsh. Like, maybe you could go with a B. Looking at Clare and the first of our Liam McCarthy teams, we've gone with an F. Look, first of all, I must say, I don't think Clare are a bad team. I think they'll be up in the mix next year. I think they'll be in the conversation next season, no doubt about that. I think, look, when you win an All-Ireland and when you reach the Holy Grail and you hit that moment that Clare had been striving to achieve in the years prior to winning it in 2024, there could always be a bit of a drop off. We've seen it with so many counties in football and hurling down the years. And like, the mad thing is, with Clare. They only had 2 wins all year, and both of them actually came against Limerick, and one in the league, one in the championship as well. And like, it's kind of bizarre because even though they won the All-Ireland last year, the one kind of stick you could like throw at Clare was that they've never really beaten Limerick in any like big games, whether it be Munster finals or anything like that. They've obviously beaten them in the round robin a couple of times in the past before. And obviously, I mean, this version of this Limerick team, like not going back like 10 years ago around like that. I'm talking about this Limerick team under John Kiley from like 2018 onwards. Disappointing season. Mark Rodgers was their top scorer with 223 for Clare. They were relegated from Division 1A as well, finishing bottom. So a disappointing season for Clare, but I think in saying that, they're not going away. They're going to be in the conversation next year. And lads, think of how competitive Munster is going to be next year. You have the All-Ireland champions in Tipperary from this year. You have the All-Ireland champions last year. You have Limerick's 4-in-a-row team. Look, maybe there might be some players going in and out, but the bulk of that team will still be there. And then you've got Cork, who everyone fancies to win the All-Ireland, but can't seem to quite do so. So, you know, and then you've got Waterford. Poor Waterford, you know, stuck in there as well. Very good side, Waterford. But yeah, look, we're going to go an F for Clare. Moving on to Cork then, and we're going to go with a B for Cork. Look, it's a difficult one. I think, you know, Cork, in my opinion, they had a near perfect season right up until the final 35 minutes. Like, this was like a classic long distance runner, leading the race for the majority of the year and, you know, absolutely coasting. And then in the last, like, you know, last couple of, you know, kilometers of the race just completely falling apart. And that's literally what has happened to Cork here. I mean, they won a Munster Championship. They won a league as well. They hadn't won a league in a long time, I think in like 30 years or something of that nature. Been a long time since they won the league. And then as well, thinking back to Munster, although they'd won Munster, I think back in 2018, it'd been a long time since Cork were like in a Munster final and competitive and everything else sort of in regards to that. So the fact they won the Munster, they beat Limerick as well on penalties, I think you do have to give them praise for that. And look, they coasted their way to the final as well. Like, Dublin are not a bad team, lads, and Cork made them look like schoolboys. Do you know what I mean? Like Dara Fitzgibbon, Alan Connolly, Tim O'Mahony, Brian Hayes, like they absolutely ripped Dublin inside and out. And being there in Croke Park, you can only sit back in awe in watching this Cork side. Things went horribly wrong against Tipperary. In the first half, I don't think they were that bad, but in the second half, they absolutely capitulated. And I've seen some bizarre WhatsApp rumors about players fighting and everything else, you know, and I don't believe that kind of thing, but what did happen at halftime, I don't know, because they came out absolutely toothless in the second half, only scoring 2 points. But look, as a whole, you have to go with a B. In terms of their best players this year, Brian Hayes was brilliant. I thought Dara Fitzgibbon was very, very good as well. Sean O'Donoghue seems to be getting a lot of slack recently. Still think he's a very good player, and I had him in my All-Star team of the year. So I think he's had a very good season. But yeah, Cork, B. Looking at Down, we've gone for a B here. Solid season for Down. They were promoted from Division 2 as champions, and they finished 5th in the Joe McDonagh with their only win versus Kerry. Like, when you looked at that Joe McDonagh at the start of the year, you would have been a little bit concerned for Down, because Kerry are one of them teams that always seem to punch above their weight a little bit. They've gotten to a couple of Joe McDonagh Cup finals down the years, and you were kind of a little bit worried that maybe Down will be the side to get relegated, but they stayed up, credit to them. They did take some absolute beatings at different stages in the Joe McDonagh, but they still did enough to stay up, and that is the most important thing. Pierce Og McCrickard and Tom McGrattan, 2 of their very impressive players, and very curious to see Down and Antrim in the Joe McDonagh next year as well. Bit of a rivalry, bit of a derby, and hopefully we can get a good game. Looking at Dublin, discussing the first of our Leinster teams, or you know, Leinster senior hurling championship teams, shall we say. Obviously we discussed a few Leinster teams, but they're in the Joe McDonagh. So with Dublin, we've gone for a B here. The first All-Ireland semi-final appearance since 2013 with that famous win versus Limerick. And look, that win versus Limerick is one of the reasons why Dublin are as high as a B. I think had they have been beaten quite comfortably by Limerick, you probably would have gone with a C. You could have argued a D potentially as well. But look, overall, a very good year for Dublin. First season for Niall O'Callaghan, and he's done a phenomenal job, to be honest with you. You know, you think of some of the changes within the Dublin team, Owen O'Donnell moving across to the footballers. We finished 3rd in Division 1B, which was a little bit disappointing at that time, to be honest with you. I would have expected us to be in that final, but I think credit has to go to Offaly there. Sean Curry, outstanding with 468, finishing as the top scorer in the championship actually as well. So quite an incredible stat there. And look, that win versus Limerick, lads, was absolutely phenomenal. Unfortunately, I wasn't there. I was at a birthday barbecue, but I seen the game and jumping around like a madman, like an absolute weirdo, at a barbecue when no one else was really that interested. But it was an incredible win, an incredible story. And it shows the potential within this Dublin side in terms of some of the players that are coming through. Conor Burke, I think, was outstanding this year. You've got Ronan Hayes. He was kind of been in and out, but he had an impressive enough year. John Heatherton, and of course, Keane O'Sullivan, lads. Absolutely phenomenal season from him. So, we've gone with a B for Dublin. For Galway, we've gone with a D. This is a tricky one as well. Like, maybe some would argue that this should be maybe a C. But, like, the question I'll ask everyone in the comments is, have Galway actually improved since last year? Look, last year they didn't get out of Leinster, okay? They didn't get out of Leinster at all. And this year they have gone out. They did get out of Leinster and they actually got to a Leinster final. But when you think about it, they were beaten fairly comfortably by Kilkenny. They had that spell in the second half where they nearly turned it around. But all in all, it was fairly comfortable from Kilkenny, if we're being honest. And then, like, against Tipperary, I know Tipperary went on to win the All-Ireland, but they were just absolutely skilled inside and out. It was embarrassing, really, from a Galway perspective. And, like, you know, they finished third in the league as well, 3 wins, 3 defeats. Cathal Mannion, obviously their standout player this year, scoring 267. And as I've said previously, you know, he kind of carried Galway to that quarterfinal this year. They have maybe gotten slightly better, but I just think for Galway as a county, for what they should be aspiring to do and achieve, they should be looking for a little bit more, in my opinion. And I think Micheál Donoghue knows that. And to be honest with you, I do think there's a few players in the Galway team that need to stay, but I genuinely do think he needs to rip it up a little bit, because I don't think you'll get very far with this team over the next couple of years. The squad of players that are there might sound a bit harsh, but that's just my opinion. Kerry, we've gone with a D here. Look, they were relegated from the Joe McDonagh with only 1 win, and that actually came versus Kildare on the opening day, which is a little bit bizarre when you think about it, that they actually beat the eventual Joe McDonagh Cup winners. They finished third in Division 2 as well, 3 wins, 3 losses there. Shane Nolan and Padraig Boyle, 2 players who very much impressed. Look, it's a hard one with Kerry. You looked at the standard in the Joe McDonagh and you said, you know, relegation was a possibility potentially, and in the end, that's how it's transpired. There's still some very good hurlers in there, and they're still a team that you would say are probably one of the favourites for the Christie Ring next year, which I think will be great for Kerry hurling in general to actually win a major trophy in Croke Park, because obviously they haven't been able to get over the line in the Joe McDonagh in those couple of years. So yeah, we'll go with a D for Kerry. Kildare, we've gone with an A, and I think I don't need to explain this one. Joe McDonagh Cup champions, 2nd in Division 2, finishing runners-up as well. Phenomenal season for Kildare. I mean, for them to win the Joe McDonagh, absolutely phenomenal. And you know what? Like, when they lost to Kerry, like, you would have been a little bit concerned for them that once again they've come up to the Joe McDonagh with a little bit of hype, you know, the dark horses, a team that's developing and improving, and then they go and lose to Kerry, and you're thinking, geez, they might be in a bit of relegation trouble here. But since then, absolutely phenomenal. The likes of David Coulter, Jack Sheridan, Gary Keegan, all very impressive from a Kildare perspective. They were hammered by Dublin in the preliminary quarterfinals. But look, that was a week after winning the Joe McDonagh, which, by the way, they were phenomenal in that final versus Laois. They beat them fairly comfortably in the end. And look, it's great to see like hurling kind of progressing in Kildare. I think, like I've said this in football, and I'll say the same in hurling, we want to see teams progressing. We want to see more teams coming along. And I think there is a genuine case for expanding the Leinster Championship over the next couple of years. Whether they actually do it, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, let's go with an A for Kildare. For Kilkenny, we've gone for a C. Look, an underwhelming year for the Cats, it must be said. Beaten in the All-Ireland semi-finals. They won the Leinster Championship again. Like, what is it? Like 5 in a row now they've won in Leinster since 2019. So, like, it kind of is incredible to think that they're so dominant in Leinster. I think it actually might be 6 in a row. 6 in a row, so it was. Just have to double check that there. Yeah, like that's kind of mad, isn't it? Like 6 in a row Leinster champions. It probably shows how poor the quality of hurling has been in Leinster. Like Dublin have progressed, but they're not at the of the level of a Kilkenny. At least not as of now. Anyway, maybe after what we did this year, we have a chance. But look, Looking at Kilkenny, finished fourth, 3 wins, 3 losses in Division 1A. They won every game in Leinster, barring Wexford, which was ultimately a dead rubber. Martin Keown, their standout player this year, scored 615 from play. And TJ Reid, I thought as well, did actually play quite well in the semi-finals versus Tipperary, but ultimately fell short. So an underwhelming year for the Cats. Again, it's hard to know. Like, are they progressing? Are they getting worse? It feels like they're just kind of staying static. So ultimately, that's why I've gone for a C. For Laois, we've gone for a C as well. A disappointing year overall for Laois. Back-to-back Joe McDonagh Cup finals now that they've lost. And they came in 2 years ago against a year ago, I should say, against the young Offaly side, and they obviously beat them. And this Kildare side are somewhat similar as well, so disappointing there. But looking at their Division 1B campaign, they finished 6th, relegated with just one win. They finished 2nd in the Joe McDonagh and ultimately were runners up there. Tomas Keys and James Duggan, very impressive. And by the way, looking at James Duggan, 8 goals and 6 points he scored this year. So a very, very impressive season from James Duggan. But overall for Laois, again, it's a hard one. Like, they're not quite taking that next step to get back into Leinster. They seem to be falling short quite a lot in the Joe McDonagh. And to be honest with you, like, looking at some of the teams that are going to be in the Joe McDonagh next year, I'm not even sure if Laois will get to a final next year. We've got Limerick and we've gone for a D here. Look, and to be honest with you, I was tinkering on like going for an F or something like that here, to be honest with you, after the disappointment that Limerick had losing to Dublin in the All-Ireland quarterfinals. But look, they still did get to a Munster final. They only lost that on penalties as well. So when you kind of deep it, they drew the game. We're very, very unlucky not to have won that in the end. And really do think a replay is what should have happened there. But look, they finished 5th in Division 1A, 2 wins from 6, narrowly escaping relegation. But especially with these bigger counties and Limerick and whatnot, it's hard one to kind of judge the league at the best of times. They did get to a Munster final, as we were kind of mentioning previously. They were actually quite low scoring compared to their rivals. Looking at what they actually racked up in terms of scoring-wise in Munster, only Waterford actually scored less than them, which is interesting because they finished bottom of the Munster round robin. So for Limerick, look, at a disappointing. I think that Dublin game, like, they were just miles off it. Look, if Limerick are at the pace and the pace that we know they can produce, they would have won that game. I've no doubts about that. But they were a good bit off it. And it does feel like, we've saw it before with a lot of great teams. Once you lose one game, once that invincibility cloak has been revealed a little bit, like what we saw with the Dublin footballers down the years, you can be a lot more vulnerable. And all of a sudden, Dublin have beaten them. Cork have beaten them a couple of times now in recent years. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Limerick next year. I've gone with a D. Let me know. Like, I think an F would have been a bit harsh because they still reached the Munster final. They still produced some brilliant hurling this year. Like, that performance versus Cork in the round robin was absolutely brilliant. And they produced some really, really good performances this year. So ultimately, we've gone with a D, but let me know in the comments what you would have here. Next up, we've got Offaly, and we've gone with a B here. So they were promoted from Division 1B, finishing second in the end. They stayed up with one win in the Leinster Championship. That win came versus Antrim. Look, they competed quite well in Leinster. They were very unlucky against the Dubs in Parnell Park. They probably should have won that game. Very, very close, kind of going down the home stretch. And they had some bright sparks and bright moments this year, Offaly. They have a young side. They obviously still have a couple of players to come back. And the likes of Brian Doiglan and Killian Sampson are 2 players that have impressed this season. And I've been impressed with Offaly. And again, you want to see Offaly at the top table. You want to see Offaly producing, improving, and all this kind of thing. And we are seeing that, to be fair. So we're going to go with a B for Offaly. They're progressing, they're improving quite nicely, so let's go to B. And then we've got Tipperary, and there's no surprise here that we're going with an A, lads, because after winning the All-Ireland Hurling Championship, I don't think there can be any disagreement in regards to going with an A here. And you know what the interesting thing is? If Tipperary had lost that final, I might have gone with an A as well, because like when you think of where they were at this time last year, lads, under Liam Cahill, I mean, people were talking about Liam Cahill leaving. He was having arguments with journalists, Tipperary journalists and everything else, like, locally. And it just felt like it was all falling apart, not just for Tipperary, but also for Liam Cahill as well, because things went sour towards the end of Waterford, and things didn't really start well in his time at Tipperary either, like, if we're being brutally honest. So things weren't going good. There was talks about certain players like needing to leave the panel, like, too much reliance on the McGraths, the younger players not kind of coming in and stepping up. But Liam Cahill has been phenomenal, and Tipperary in general have been absolutely brilliant this year. as a whole. And looking at their campaign in the Munster Hurling Championship, like they finished third in the end, drew at Limerick, but big wins versus the likes of Clare and Waterford. And to think they were, beaten quite comprehensively versus Cork. Ultimately, Darren McCarthy was sent off there. But I remember watching them though versus Galway and thinking right there, because up until that point, like Tipperary had finished third, but it was hard to kind of judge them. They were very good versus Limerick, but then they were although they had a man sent off versus Cork, I thought they were very poor versus Cork. They got over against Clare, got over the line very well against Clare, and got a big win, and against Waterford. But you still weren't entirely sure about them. They were a bit of an unknown quantity a little bit. But the win versus Galway and the win versus Kilkenny, absolutely phenomenal. Ronan Marr at centre-back, what a season he's had, marking Brian Hayes the last day versus Cork. Darren McCarthy stepping up as well, silencing the doubters, like he said, 113 in the final. Incredible performance from him. John McGrath, as I've said before, hurler of the year. John McGoat, I think, is the name that I've seen a lot of people call him recently, and I completely agree with that. John McGrath's ended up with 516 from play this year. Like, that is absolutely phenomenal. Jason Ford in there as well with 316. Really, really impressive performance from him. And even Jake Morris as well, 24 points from him, playing in a different position to what we've usually seen him as well. So an absolute no-brainer here. Tipperary A. We've got Waterford and we've gone for a C here. Look, they won Division 1B, finishing top and beating Offaly. They did finish fifth in the end in Munster. They did get that big win versus Clare. It's just such a difficult one for Waterford. Like, they're in such a competitive Munster Championship. And I know people have said, should 4 teams come out of Munster and everything else? Like, I don't really agree with, like, out of a 5-team competition, 4 teams progressing. That doesn't really sit right with me, to be honest with you. And I think, like back in the old days when you had the Munster Championship and you had no backdoor, like, that was even more rootless. Do you know what I mean? Because you'd lose one game and then that would be it. And even the backdoor in hurling, could pit Munster teams against each other. So overall, I think it's just one of them where it's at. I think for Waterford, like, the mad thing is, if Waterford get out of Munster next year, they could win the All-Ireland. Like, that's just how it seems to be going in Munster at the moment. Like, they definitely did improve this year. They definitely did get better. They have been getting better, over the last kind of couple of years since Liam Cahill kind of brought them a little bit to their peak. But you have the likes of Stephen Bennett, Pádraig Fitzgerald, very good player as well. It's just an unlucky one for Waterford looking at the teams they have to compete with. But be great to see them get out on Munster this year. It'd be great to see them kind of, rise up a bit as well. But we've gone with a C for Waterford. For Westmeath, we've gone for a D, and they finished bottom of Division 1B with only 1 win, and that was against Carlow, and they finished 4th in the Joe Mac with their only wins against Down and Kerry. It's a running team. When teams get relegated from Leinster, they do tend to struggle. Like, they don't always tend to come straight back up, and that's why it is maybe not exactly a given that Antrim bounce back next season. Because, you think back to when they beat Wexford, a couple of years ago, in the Leinster round robin, and that incredible comeback, and they probably haven't really kicked on since then. And haven't really, have been closer towards relegation in the Joe McDonagh than they have been towards promotion. Do you know that way? Killian Doyle and David O'Reilly impressed. I've gone with a D. Like, I do think Westmeath should be doing better personally. And I think when you're looking at the changes in management over Westmeath in the last couple of years, I think a lot of Westmeath fans and the Westmeath County Board probably agree. And then lastly, we have Wexford, and we've gone for a D here as well. So they were relegated from Division 1A with 2 wins from 6. They finished 4th in Leinster. And it's a hard one to know. Like, since Davy Fitz has left, like, Wexford just haven't really been able to kick on. They've had different managers. A lot of things just haven't really kind of worked for Wexford. And I think aside from Lee Chin, I think Lee Chin, it's the definition of a one-man team in many ways. Lee Chin has been phenomenal. And I think aside from that, they do struggle. And that's why they haven't been able to get out of Leinster. You always feel like there's players there within Wexford. You feel like there's another level they can go up on. You feel like they're a type of team that if they can get out of Leinster, they could maybe be a danger. I know they got out of Leinster last year, and obviously were beaten quite comfortably by Clare. But generally speaking, they haven't progressed. I think it must be said, they haven't gotten better since last year. So you would have to go with a D. You could argue a C, but I'm going to go with a D. And there we go. They are the hurling grades. So let me know yours in the comments down below. Let me know as a whole, for your own county as well. How did you feel you got on? How would you grade your own county based on your county's performance in the league and championship this season? Overall, it's been a very entertaining year in the hurling championship. We've had surprises, we've had shocks, we've had thrills. and we've had moments that we certainly did not expect, and I think the All-Ireland final very much epitomised that. But let me know your thoughts, your opinions. Hit the like button and subscribe if you could, and until the next one, we'll see you all later.